Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Realeyes The World Podcast, specifically the Enlightening Series. And so today we're going to talk about acceptance, or you could also say it's surrender. Um, this concept or understanding of living uh, with acceptance or surrendering is one of the key tools you would need when you're looking to free your mind from all the stress and anxiety, in some cases depression, or probably in most cases when you let's get right to it. So when you're not accepting something, um, you're practically resisting. And so when you live in a world of duality, where there's no yes without no, there's no up without down, there's no acceptance without resistance. And you could say that vice versa. There's no resistance without acceptance. So when you're getting this it's not even living in a world without duality to say single looking at things from a single view, but it's basically living in the world of what is. So when you accept, without judgment, you acknowledge what is as it is. So that's to say, when you are in duality, when you are in duality, a world of duality where you're still looking at things black and white, right or wrong, then there will be things that you can accept, or not necessarily say can accept, but there will be things that you do accept, and there will be things that you don't accept. That's just the nature of it when you're living on that level of unconsciousness. So when you do accept things, and we'll get to a specific example here in a second, but when you do accept things, you're basically resisting. You stop resisting. Um, the fact of it's so hard to say without an example, but we'll get to the example in a second. But this it's all one big picture. So again, I do need to do an episode on duality, and perhaps that will be the next episode. But when you get in, and we'll call it one-mindedness, versus when you're living in duality. So when you're living in one-mindedness, there's no judgment. You don't even have to accept. You don't resist. It just simply is what it is. And so, when you start to awaken to this fact, and really it's a fact that you're wasting a lot of energy and thoughts on things that you don't need to. So that's to say, when you're creating anxiety or stress or depression for yourself, your mind is working subconsciously, and most cases consciously, because that's how you beat yourself up and you make yourself feel bad when you talk bad to yourself. But when your mind is in that state, it's basically resisting the facts of what is. And I'm sorry, I lost my thought there. Um, but anywho, to give you an example, and one of the first things you do awaken to is that everything you've done up to this point, and whether you're listening to it right now or 10 years from now, up until a point of time, every choice you've made, everything that's happened to you has put you where you are at the moment that you're thinking about this. So, and that's to say, okay, yeah, that's a very simple thing to intellectually comprehend, right? Um, but when you take it on a spiritual level, whether you're content or not with your current self, and again, that's living on that same plane of duality versus one-mindedness. But if you do have an opinion about yourself, um, it it stems from basically where everything that's led up to where you are at that point. And so, when you reach a point in your journey where you can accept things for the way they are, one of the first things you do accept is everything you've done. And it's almost like you forgive yourself for everything you haven't done, or all the bad things that you did do, however you feel about them. They simply become a fact rather than um, the things that make up your identity. Okay, and then that ties into the ego. And so it's and you can see how this particular concept is it's when you come to a level of consciousness, everything's kind of interwebbed together. And so this acceptance concept, it it's almost like when you come to a level of understanding of awakening, or understanding who you really are versus your ego's perception of who you are. A lot of these concepts, duality, acceptance, time, words, they run perpendicular, not no, they run parallel to each other, and that you have to have a kind of general understanding of them. And maybe one day I will make a graphic for this. Um, but it's something that I myself am still learning. Okay, but anyway, back to the fact that when you accept, one of the first things you do accept is who you are. Um, it and when you think about it, whether you're on a spiritual journey of becoming more conscious of who you are, or conscious of your being, when you think about it, even though you did all those things unconsciously, and they've led up to this point to where I have you thinking about this now, it's almost like it was meant to be, even though you didn't intend for it to be. So whether you had ill feelings about your past actions, or whatever might be coming to you in the future, everything happened the way it did on your own doing. And despite if that opposed your goals, and a lot of people struggle with this, and that they'll have goals, but then they have bad habits that will repress progress towards those goals. Um, but and whether you do that consciously or unconsciously, it's kind of like it was meant to be. Yeah, I don't know how to say that, in that, if you're at a point where you're listening to this, it was meant to be all of those decisions, even if you had some ultimate goal, whether it be famous or be rich, um, and those are very poor goals, but those are very common ones. Um, you realize who you were or who you are being, and the actions you've made, and where you are towards reaching that goal is all your own doing. And so the word for this is karma, and that there's a very common misinterpretation or misuse of the word karma, like what goes around comes around. That's not really karma. Karma is basically your own actions. So me doing this podcast is my own karma. There's no, oh, I did something positive or negative, and so now I'm paying for it by doing the podcast. That's the common misuse or misunderstanding of what karma is. Karma is basically whatever you do. So, and that's action wise. Obviously, sitting idle. Well, I guess sitting idle technically is an action, but um, you get the point. But basically, your own karma, your own doings, lead you up to where you are right now. And if you can understand that, whether you thought you did all this by choice or you didn't do that by choice, you gotta, when you accept it, you basically surrender yourself to what is. And I can't add anything after that because yeah, I know grammatically speaking, or however you want to call it, I can't really end a sentence on surrendering yourself to what is. But on a spiritual plane, that's what makes sense to say what is. You surrender yourself to fact, to sky is blue. That's it. There's no debating. Oh, it's a sky blue versus a navy blue. It's simply blue. There's no judging. There's no peeling layers of the level of blue. Why is it blue from the ground and clear when you're in it up in the sky? There's none of that. It's simply, the sky is the sky. And really, I mentioned all of several concepts running parallel earlier, and I mentioned words earlier. And so just to kind of to fill you in on this, words, to say, are basically agreements. So when we call the sky, we've all generally accepted the fact that we're going to call this the sky. When in reality, there's no word for what it actually is. As humans, we label everything. But if you think about it, a mouse isn't a mouse. It's another being until we call it a mouse, because humans generally accepted or agreed that, and depending on your language, whatever, it's a mouse. But when you peel all these layers back, things are what they are. No labels. You put words to it, that's your own doing. Excuse me. But, I say that so when you surrender to what is, you surrender to the current state of the world around you. No judgment, no labels, and, just being. So, I'll give you a bad example. Well, not really a bad example, but a harsh example. Say, you're a janitor, or you clean porta potties, for example. And a lot of us probably can't stomach that. But and so with awareness, we talk about our five senses, right? So I picked this example because if you think about cleaning a toilet, or especially a public use one, or a porta potty where the stuff marinates until it's empty, the smell is horrendous, right? And so the people that do this for a living, in a sense, have accepted that smell for what it is. Maybe they have a mask on or whatever. There's no escaping the smell. It could be on your clothes after you're done, if even if you have some kind of mask to block the scent. But those people who do that for a living, or anybody that does like a dirty job, I don't if the show that used to be on Discovery Channel, I think, Dirty Jobs, that comes to mind. But the people that do those type of things, or say even work with garbage, they kind of, I don't want to say become immune to the smell, but it's almost like when you're in your own house, everybody's got their own body scent. And you can't really smell your own body scent because you're for some reason, the way the brain and the nose work together, the nose will ignore things that aren't unusual. So that's to say, it's used to how you smell. And so it's not going to look for that smell constantly. It's going to almost treat that as null. And so people who work with garbage or clean dirty stuff all the time, their nose almost treats that as null. And so in a sense, that it kind of accepts, this is what it is. And, same people with people who do anything that has to do with, touching weird feeling stuff, or even for some reason hospitals and working with the human body, whether it's surgery or emergency room stuff, people become immune to those things because they learn to accept it. Now in an easy world, if you learn to accept something as bad as cleaning a toilet all the time, one would hope they could learn how to accept everything at once, but it doesn't work that way. I can only give you that analogy, and that, there are people who do those things because they learn how to accept them and surrender themselves to, this is work. This is my job. This is what I have to do for a living, and that's it. And so, they're and here's using the same example. Here's a example of not accepting, and that, say you do have one of those jobs and you do put up with the smell, okay, but you haven't really accepted it. And so you find yourself complaining to your friends or family about how much you don't like your job and all the minor the nuances and inconveniences that your job causes you. That in itself is resistance, or not accepting what is. So, you could say, oh, but I deal with it every day. But when you go behind, not even to say go behind the back of your job, but I guess when you go behind yourself to talk bad about your job, to, somebody, you're basically resisting what is. I mean, that's not to say if somebody asks about what you do and so you have to explain them the nitty gritty details. But if this is what you think is pastime conversation, and that it's like, oh man, I had to, clean 10 porta potties yesterday and all of them were bad. And, that's number one, you start taking yourself out of present time and you're reliving that experience. Number two, there's obviously a negative context attached to it where you feel like you need to vent or rant to somebody to either validate your opinion or I don't really know what to call it, but your ego feels like it needs to talk about itself, and so they're there to listen, about how much you hate your job. Um, that's all not accepting what is. I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. I'm not gonna try to put it lightly. It's basically, and you can take this example to anything in your life. Whatever you talk bad about, there's some type of resistance in you that you're not accepting, that whatever it is what it is. So I hope that helps. That I I don't want to say I wish I had more examples, personal examples, and that as I hit the 1 year mark of since I started my spiritual journey, it appears some of the details of what I used to struggle with are kind of falling off my radar, and my mind is more enveloped into what I'm learning and what I'm observing every day and all the time, so to say. But I mean, basically everything about the old me, we'll call it, I wasn't accepting things. So I had depression. I was overweight. Um, where I was in life wasn't where I wanted to be. I had anxiety for survival. We can sum up a whole lot of them, the different details to say, I had anxiety about just surviving. I had anxiety for the unknown of the future. And then I had stress with, how I dealt with things, whether I was procrastinating or if I was stuck in depression or anxiety at the present moment. All that created stress. And so I wasn't accepting the fact that I was overweight. You know, overweight, it's, yes, you have to deal with it every day, but every day that you stress out about it and you don't accept it is a lost day of progress, because what I'm finding with, you becoming enlightened or awakening, whatever you might call it, is you're basically freeing up energy from useless or pointless thoughts or unproductive thoughts, we'll say. You're wasting that energy towards those thoughts instead of something more productive or positive, and it all adds up. When we say pennies add up to dollars, this is what awakening brings you to. You realize that you may have been, and for me, I feel like I was probably spending 90% of my day in negative, useless thoughts. And if you think about that, 365 days a year, and I'll just go ahead and do a calculation here. So times 24 hours, and then we'll say 90%. So, and this is 24 hours, doesn't include sleeping, but, we could say almost 8,000 out of 9,000 hours were spent thinking of useless stuff. Oh, I'm fat. Okay, how many times am I going to think that? But the reality was that I was unconsciously doing that all the time. Oh, I want to be a professional race car driver, but I'm not winning. I don't have the funding, blah, blah, blah. I don't know how many times that ran through my head. Okay. So, accepting the fact that I am a amateur level race car driver is a lot easier than playing out why I'm not a professional race car driver, right? And then the anxieties, and I said survival is one. So, and I like to bring up this one about not driving in the rain because that's how petty I was. But I would not. I would almost opt out of going anywhere, even if my family still went. I stayed home because it was raining. Because there's an increased chance of a traffic accident, which includes death. And so I was so petty with that I would avoid whatever it was, and I'd just not go, and I'd stay home, and that was that. Um, so I missed out. I realize now I missed out a lot of family activities and memorable moments, which honestly I can't even tell you what memorable moments mean to me right now because I live so much for the present that when I think of the past, it's, as I said, accepting what is, it simply was. So, it's something I know came and went, and it was what it was. There, don't relive the feelings, etc. It's an acceptance of, okay, that's what happened. But anyways, the if I would have just accepted driving in the rain was part of, the journey, and if you think, life's one big journey made of a billion small journeys, that one journey to, say a concert in the rain, that was just part of it. Accepting that, there wasn't no canceling or backing out or whatever the case is because it was raining. I was resisting the fact that it was raining, and sure, it makes sense to live to minimize your chance of death, but there's a there's a saying I heard from Alan Watts about moths that run into, like the bug zapper or a candlelight, and that the moth will do that because it mistakes the light for a mating call from I guess a female moth or whatever, and whichever sex approaches the other sex, and so they fly into the light, and whether it's the candle or a bug zapper, boom, they die. They do this as an instinct, and so they don't ponder every time they see a light or a bug zapper, is that a mating call or am I gonna die this time? Right? And so if you put that in the same perspective of humans, that's what differentiates us from other animals, except at that point we're abusing our ability to think for useless. I mean, I don't know what to call it. And perhaps we don't need to call it useless, but we need to realize um ultimately it contributes to nothing other than you learning on this path. Unfortunately, for something like that, like the moth, learning is survival or death. And again, as humans with the ability to think about things like this, um, that's what really differentiates us, and that we do take advantage of this ability. However, we need there needs to be a limit. Like everything, and it's okay in moderation. Not I say that for almost everything I've come to realize, but you can't miss out on life because it's raining, because have a higher chance of dying. That's what I'm getting at. And so when you accept that fact, and for me, I even love to ride passengers now. Before I had to be a driver, I had to be in control of the car. But now I love driving or riding as a passenger. Um, but when you accept that things aren't in your control, and this kind of goes full circle back to everything that's led up to this point, whether you consciously did it or didn't do it, or unconsciously didn't or did do it. It all played out the way it was supposed to play out. And so, if you're supposed to die in a rainy car accident, that's what happens. You won't know it. I won't know it. And you don't live in fear of it. That's what acceptance is. That's what surrendering is. Once you're able to do that, you free up a lot of mind power, and living in contentment becomes, it's not the answer. It's not once you accept things, that's how you live happily. But it's a part of the solution. It's a part of, it's not even a solution. It's part of the formula. So, when you do surrender yourself to everything, you realize that, like a grain of sand on the beach, that's all you are in this universe. And some of us will have bigger impacts on the world than others. But in the grand scheme of things, that person is still, one grain of sand on a beach. Just like the rest of us. And when you put that in perspective of the universe, that's to say, nothing's out of place. And even if you feel like it's your own bad actions, you can't stress out about them now, because everything happens the way it does to add up to something. You can't tell what it's going to add up to. And so when you accept that everything is the way it is in its current state, you get rid of that anxiety. Okay? So what? You got a DUI. Okay? You don't know if you're a driver and that DUI forces you to have a job change and you become a millionaire. You won't know that. So don't stress out about, when you do get a DUI in that present moment. It would be useless to expend energy, especially when you're caught red-handed, right? But expend energy on resisting the current situation. And when you accept it, again, you don't know. Okay, yeah, you might have to spend a year or two in jail. Whatever the case is, you remove the bad, you remove the good. You look at it with one mind, no duality. It might sound crazy, but if you look at it as just these things are happening, no judgment, you accept them, and you can't accept them like, okay, I accept this, I'm not going to resist it. You have to accept it in it's like a mutual, all right, this is happening. Let's be present to what is happening rather than me placing myself in future time and how this might get me fired from my job. When you do that, that's how people stress out. That's how, they get anxiety. They might make the situation more worse for themselves by fighting the police or whatever the case is. You got to be present to your current moment by accepting that whatever is happening, and that you surrender yourself to whatever the results may be. And yes, that's not to say just throw in the towel and do nothing and, cross your arms and hope magic works itself. But it's being present to your situation. That's the magic. Once you free up your mind from stressing out of, oh no, I'm getting a DUI. What am I going to tell my job? What is that? You run those through your head. I can't even repeat them all. But instead, you become present to the situation. You might have a casual conversation while getting arrested with the cop. You might strike a string in his heart. I don't know how that saying goes, but you might touch him in some way that he might let you off the hook because he could sympathize or empathize with you, or whatever the case is. You that's what being present is. And that now you don't do that with that's to say you don't do that with expectations, though. The expectation is unknown. That's how you keep your actions in line with accepting. So when you accept that everything is the way it is, your expectations have to also be that things will come the way they come. So just because you were nice to the cop instead of throwing a fit about how you might get fired and you expect to get let off the hook, it doesn't work that way either. Okay? So that's why there's this acceptance and surrender concepts. They go hand in hand. Alright, so I pretty much touched on all the points that I've had written down. This is just one of a few concepts. My last podcast episode of the series, I believe, was on impermanence. So just to tie those together, I was discussing impermanence and how nothing is in the current state it will be. Everything's forever changing. Acceptance of that fact is a key thing. And so I wasn't really sure of how to order these, because I also have a episode planned for duality, an episode planned for open-mindedness, and so they all kind of run parallel, and they will compound on top of each other, but it's more of it's a parallel compounding. I don't even know how to describe it. It's almost like your five senses. These are different understandings that just work in conjunction with each other. Alright, so we're going to call it a stop here on acceptance and surrender. If you guys aren't subscribed, whether you're listening through one of the podcast outlets or on YouTube, please do subscribe. That helps me statistically, and especially to keep things going. And when I gotta weigh decisions, is this worth my time or not? Things like subs and views and likes, that all adds up to keeping me doing this. And I know it's pretty early in my I don't want to say career, but in my doing of this, the podcast. But do help a brother out, and that I like talking about this. You should see my notes versus what I talk. I write down a few bullets and I come up with 40 minutes of content off the top of my head. I don't say that to brag, but this is obviously something, I don't want to say it's effortless, but this is something that really comes from the heart versus being thought of and sat upon, like scripted, so to say. Alright, but anyways, check me out on any of the previous episodes or the future episodes to come, and I hope you guys continue to like this stuff. Leave comments if you have requests or comments or even questions. I love to talk about this stuff. All right. Thanks, everybody.